This is an artistic story told through the memory of my father. Some of it is real. Some of it is the way it was told to me. AI visuals are used as period reconstruction, not as documentary footage. Take it as a story. It's November. I'm sitting in a rental car on University Way in Seattle, watching the rain come down on somebody else's windshield. The building across the street used to be a martial arts school. In 1964, a 23-year-old man named Bruce Lee opened it on the ground floor. He called it the Junfan Kung Fu Institute. He taught out of it for about a year before he moved to Oakland, and after that a man named Taky kept it running until 1968. Today it's a tattoo parlor downstairs and 3 offices upstairs. I drove up here because of something my father said to me about 15 years ago. He said there was a man who came to that school 3 times a week for almost 4 years, paid his dues every month, sat on a wooden bench against the back wall, and never once got on the mat. Never trained. Never sparred. Never asked a question. Just watched. My father met him twice. Taky knew him by name. Bruce, as far as anyone can tell me, never asked him why he was there. This is a story about that man. There's a bench in there still. I can see it through the window. I don't know if it's the same one. I want it to be. The tattoo parlor uses it as a waiting bench for clients. Pine, unpainted, about 6 feet long, with a dark worn spot right in the middle of the seat where somebody sat for a long time. It's probably not the same bench. Buildings change hands, furniture gets thrown out. Nobody keeps a student bench from 1964 just because Bruce Lee happened to teach in the room. But I'm going to tell this story as if it is. Because the bench in my father's story had a worn spot in the middle, and the bench I'm looking at right now has one too, and sometimes that's all you get. Last video, I told you about a phone call. About Yip Man reaching out to Bruce one last time from Hong Kong in November of 1972, 2 weeks before he died. About a call that may or may not have happened, and my father's line that a man who teaches you when you're 13, you don't get to leave him, even if you stop calling. That one was about a call that was made. This one is the opposite. This is about a man who sat in a room with Bruce Lee 3 times a week for 4 years and, as far as anyone knows, never said a word to him about why he was there. Bruce never asked. That's the part that got stuck in me. I was at my father's apartment this morning before I drove down here. He lives about 40 minutes north of the city. I told him where I was going. He said, "Oh. Sato." That was the name. Or the name he used. Kenji Sato. I should tell you right now, before we go any further, that's not his real name. My father knows the real name. He told it to me once, in 1998, and I wrote it down, and I'm not going to say it in this video. I'll explain why later. For now, Sato. My father sipped his coffee and said, "Some people come to watch. That's enough for them." Bruce understood that. Then he didn't say anything else for about a minute, and I didn't push. Here's what I have to admit, up front. A lot of what I'm going to tell you in the next 50 minutes, I am reconstructing. My father met Sato twice. Once in 1966, when my father was 12 years old, from across a street, looking in a window. Once in 1967, when he was 13, in a diner across from the school, for about 20 minutes. That's the primary source. A 12-year-old boy through a window, and a 13-year-old boy in a diner booth. Everything else, what Taky thought of Sato, what Bruce said about him, what Sato did in the years before he started coming to the school, all of that is reconstruction. From 2 conversations between my father and Taky in the 70s. From 1 conversation between my father and a man named Skip Ellsworth, who also trained at the school, in 1981. From whatever I could piece together myself. I'm going to try to tell you which parts one know and which parts I'm guessing. The man was real. The bench was real. The 4 years were real. After that, I'm holding on by my fingernails. Here's what this video is. It's 7 short pieces. 7 chapters, each one about 5 or 6 or 7 minutes, each one built around one object. A bench. A door. Rain on a window. A porcelain cup. A right hand resting on a knee. Silence. Rain on a window again. I'm not going to give you a clean arc. I'm not going to tell you who Sato was. I don't know who Sato was. I'm going to tell you what my father saw, and what Taky told my father, and what I think happened in the spaces between. And I'm going to tell you what my father said when I asked him, sitting at his kitchen table this morning, the real question. That's at the end. But first we have to go back to 1964. To when there was no tattoo parlor. When the building was just a narrow commercial space on University Way with a hand-painted sign in English and Chinese above the door. When a young man who had not yet made a film, had not yet met Steve McQueen, had not yet written the letter I talked about 2 videos ago, opened a door and invited strangers to walk in. The school. October 1964. Bruce Lee is 23 years old. He has been in America for 5 years. He came to Seattle from Hong Kong on a steamer in 1959, 18 years old, with $100 his father had given him and the address of a family friend. He enrolled at Edison Technical School to finish high school, because his Hong Kong education didn't transfer. He worked as a waiter at Ruby Chow's restaurant on Broadway and lived upstairs above the kitchen. By 1964, he had finished high school, started at the University of Washington studying philosophy, dropped out, married Linda Emery, and moved into a small apartment with her. She was pregnant with their first child, who would be named Brandon. And he had just opened his second school. The first one had been out of a basement in Chinatown, in the International District. The second one was this one, 4750 University Way Northeast, in a neighborhood that students called the Avenue. The school was small. Maybe 600 square feet of training floor. One mat. One window on the street side. One bench against the back wall. A small changing area with a curtain. Taky Kimura was the assistant instructor. Bruce taught on Monday, Wednesday, Friday evenings when he was in town. When he wasn't, Taky taught. By 1965, when Bruce moved to Oakland to open a third school with James Lee, Taky was running University Way full-time, and Bruce was driving up from California about once a month. There were never more than about 15 students at the school at any given time. Bruce was selective. He turned people away. He didn't put up advertising. You had to be referred by somebody already training, or you had to walk in off the street and convince him in about 90 seconds that you were worth his time. The fee was about $22 a month. That's roughly $220 in today's money. Somewhere in the second week of October 1964, Taky later said it was a Wednesday evening, but he wasn't 100% sure a man walked through that door. He was Japanese. Mid-50s. Maybe 5'7". Stocky build, not athletic. He wore a charcoal wool overcoat over a white shirt and dark trousers. His hair was cut short and going gray at the temples. He carried a folded newspaper under his left arm. He took off his shoes at the door, which told Bruce he had Japanese manners even before he spoke. He bowed slightly. He said his name. Sato. He said, in careful English with an accent Taky later described as educated, not a fresh immigrant, not someone who learned English yesterday, he said, I would like to pay tuition. I do not wish to train. I would like to sit on the bench. I have to stop here. That sentence, I would like to sit on the bench, that's the sentence Taky told my father that Sato said. My father told it to me in 1998. I wrote it down. Is that exactly what Sato said? I don't know. Did he say something like it? I believe he did. Because whatever he said, Bruce Lee, who turned people away routinely, who didn't let just anyone walk in and watch, Bruce Lee said yes. And I can't think of another formulation that would have gotten that answer. Bruce didn't let people watch. He didn't want spectators in the school. He thought training was private. You were either doing it or you weren't in the room. But Sato offered to pay full tuition. $22 a month. For the privilege of sitting on a bench. And Bruce said yes. After Sato left that first night, Bruce and Taky stood by the window. I know this because Taky told my father about it in 1976. sitting in Taky's grocery store in Seattle, which he ran for 40 years alongside the school. Taky asked Bruce why he said yes. Bruce said, and again, this is Taky reconstructing Bruce, and my father reconstructing Taky, and me reconstructing my father, so take it with a grain. And Bruce said something like, he came here for a reason. It's not my reason. But it's a real one. Taky said, what if he's a cop? What if he's writing a book? What if he's some old karate guy trying to steal the curriculum? Bruce apparently laughed. He said, then he's the slowest thief in Seattle. He's going to be sitting there for years. And that, my father told me, was the only conversation Bruce and Taky ever had about Sato. 4 years of Sato sitting on that bench, and Bruce never mentioned him again. Sato came on Monday. And Wednesday. And Friday. He arrived at 6:45 every time. Class started at 7. He took off his shoes. He placed them neatly by the door, parallel, toes facing the wall. He bowed to Bruce or to Taky, if Bruce wasn't there. He walked to the bench. He sat down. He never brought the newspaper inside. Taky noticed that. He'd come in with a folded newspaper under his arm, and he'd leave it on the coat rack with his coat, and he'd sit down empty-handed. He wouldn't even read during class. He just watched. Class was an hour and a half. 7 to 8:30. At 8:30 he'd stand up, bow, put on his coat, pick up his newspaper, put on his shoes, and leave. He never stayed late. He never came early enough to talk to anybody. He never arrived during a class in progress. For the first month, the other students asked Taky about him. By the second month, they had stopped asking. By the third month, most of them had forgotten he was in the room. There's a thing about Seattle rain that anybody who lived through a Seattle winter knows. It doesn't really fall. It hangs. It pressurizes the windows. It makes the inside of a small room feel very interior, very sealed off. The school didn't have great insulation. When it rained hard, you could hear it on the roof. You could hear it on the glass. You could smell the wet wool of coats on the rack. My father says, and this is one of the things he says that I've always loved, my father says that the first time he saw the school, from the outside, looking in through the window, what he remembered most wasn't Bruce. Wasn't the movement on the mat? Wasn't Taky correcting someone's stance? It was the rain on the window. And a man sitting very still on a bench. He was 12 years old. It was November 1966. And he didn't know yet that he was looking at a person who had been sitting there for 2 years. To understand why Bruce letting Sato sit there was so strange, you have to understand how Bruce thought about the school. Bruce Lee had very specific ideas about teaching. He had trained under Yip Man in Hong Kong from about 1956 to 1958. I talked about that 2 videos ago. Yip Man taught Wing Chun the traditional way. Formal. Hierarchical. You paid respect, you followed the forms, you earned what you got. Bruce threw most of that out. He didn't care about forms. He didn't care about belts. He didn't want a uniform. He wanted to teach what he called, and this is a real Bruce phrase, documented in his letters, the honest expression of oneself. He wanted each student to fight like themselves, not like Bruce, not like Yip Man, not like anybody. But he had one rule that he kept from the Hong Kong days. You came to the mat, or you didn't come. He didn't like audiences. He didn't do demonstrations for free. After 1964 he did them rarely, only at tournaments, and he stopped doing even those by 1967 because he thought they were theater. He didn't want people who came to watch martial arts like a sport. He wanted people who came to do it. So Sato was an exception. The only standing exception I know about, in any of the 3 schools Bruce ran, over the entire run of his teaching career. And the question my father has been turning over for 50 years is why. I asked my father about this directly, the morning I'm telling you about. The one from this morning. Before I drove down here. I said, Dad. Why did Bruce let him stay? My father put his coffee down. He said, some people come to watch. That's enough for them. Bruce understood that. That's the core of it. That's what he said. I've been carrying that sentence around in my head for about 6 hours now, driving down to Seattle in the rain. Some people come to watch. That's enough for them. I don't fully understand it. I don't think my father fully understands it either. But I think Bruce understood it, and that was enough for Bruce to say yes. Taky started to notice things about Sato around the end of the first year. 1. Sato never watched the whole class. He watched about 45 minutes of every 90-minute session. The other 45 minutes, his eyes were open, he was looking toward the mat, but he wasn't actually tracking the movement. He was somewhere else. 2. The 45 minutes he watched the same things. He watched when Bruce was demonstrating. He watched when a new student was being corrected for the first time. He didn't watch sparring. He didn't watch conditioning. He didn't watch the warm-ups. He watched teaching. 3. And this is the one Taky told my father about last, almost as an afterthought. Sato never watched anyone fail. When a student was struggling, repeating a movement wrong, getting frustrated, Sato looked at the floor. Or out the window. Never at the student. I want to stop and tell you something. That last thing about Sato not watching anyone fail, that's the thing that convinced my father, somewhere in the early 70s, that he understood something about Sato he couldn't put into words. My father will not say out loud what he thinks Sato's story was. I have asked him, maybe 5 times over 30 years, what he thinks Sato was doing on that bench. Every time, he has done the same thing. He has looked at his coffee, or at his hands, or out the window, and he has said something like, "That's not for me to say." So I don't have it. I don't have the answer. I have the bench. I have the 4 years. I have the rain on the window. I have a man who watched teaching but not failure. And I have my father not saying what he thinks it means. You're going to have to sit with it the same way I've been sitting with it. In the summer of 1965, Bruce moved to Oakland to open the third school with his friend James Yim Lee. Brandon had been born in February of that year. Bruce was a father now, and he was moving south to chase a bigger idea of what the school could be. Taky ran university way after that. Bruce came up maybe once a month. By 1966, he was in Los Angeles starting to get his first real break in television, auditioning for the role that would become Kato on the Green Hornet. And Sato kept coming. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Whether Bruce was there or not. That's actually one of the interesting things. If Sato had only come when Bruce was there, you could build a theory that he was there to see Bruce specifically. Some kind of silent pilgrimage. But he came the same amount when it was just Taky teaching. He came when Bruce was in Oakland. He came when Bruce was in Los Angeles. He wasn't there for Bruce. He was there for the school. Which brings me to November 1966. A 12-year-old boy walking home from school, not Bruce's school, regular school, 7th grade, cutting through the avenue on his way to the bus stop. Wearing a hooded jacket he'd inherited from his older cousin. Carrying a canvas book bag. Tired. He passed the window of the Jun Fan Gung Fu Institute every school day. He'd been passing it for about 2 months, ever since the family had moved to a new apartment closer to campus. He knew the school was there. His father, my grandfather, had mentioned that Bruce Lee ran a school in the neighborhood. My grandfather didn't train there. My grandfather thought martial arts were a hobby for men who didn't have enough work to do. But my father, at 12, slowed down at that window every afternoon. He didn't go in. He wasn't a student. He didn't know anybody inside. He just slowed down. Looked through the glass for maybe 30 seconds. And kept walking. That November it rained hard for about 2 weeks straight. The kind of Seattle rain that doesn't stop, it just changes intensity. Some days it was a mist. Some days it was a wall. My father remembers one Friday evening, around 7:10, when it was a wall. He'd stayed late at school for some reason, maybe a detention, he doesn't remember, and he was walking the avenue in the dark, in the rain, and he stopped at the window of the school. Class had started. Bruce wasn't there that night. Bruce was in Los Angeles. Taky was teaching 4 students on the mat. Taky walking between them, correcting. My father saw all of that through the glass. The yellow light inside. The movement. The steam on the window from body heat in a small room on a cold night. And then he saw Sato. Back wall. Wooden bench. Charcoal coat folded beside him on the bench. He'd kept it that night. My father doesn't know why, usually it was on the coat rack. Hands folded in his lap. Not moving. Not tracking the students. Looking at the wall opposite, which had nothing on it except a small Chinese calligraphy scroll that Bruce had hung there in 1964. My father stood at that window for, he thinks, about 4 minutes. In the rain. 12 years old. Getting soaked. Watching a man who wasn't watching anything. He said to me, years later, he said this to me when I was maybe 16, 17, and I asked him about it. He said, I didn't know people could sit that still. I thought only dead people sat that still. And he wasn't dead. He was just somewhere. That was the first time my father saw Sato. Through a window. In the rain. Not knowing his name. Not knowing the bench had been his for 2 years already. Not knowing he would sit there for almost 2 more. My father walked home that night and didn't tell his parents where he'd been. He didn't tell anybody for about a year. But he started walking past the window on purpose after that. Not every day. Maybe twice a week. Always in the early evening. Always around 7:15, when he knew class was going and Sato would be on the bench. He wasn't stalking. He wasn't obsessed. He was 12. He later told me, he just wanted to check that the man was still there. And the man was always still there. For almost a year, that was the entire relationship. A boy on a sidewalk. A man on a bench. A pane of glass between them. Rain, most of the time, in between. They didn't speak. They didn't make eye contact through the window. Sato never saw him, or if he did, he never showed it. My father was just another kid walking past the school on the avenue. There were a lot of kids walking past the school on the avenue. But in October of 1967, 1 year after my father first saw him, something changed. My father turned 13 that October. And on a Tuesday afternoon, a Tuesday, not a class day, the school was dark. My father walked past the window and saw Sato. Not inside. Outside. Sitting in a diner across the street from the school. Alone. In a booth by the window. Drinking tea from a small porcelain cup. And my father, 13 years old, carrying his books, soaked from the walk, tired, and for reasons he has never been able to explain to me, crossed the street. Opened the door of the diner. Walked to the booth. And sat down across from him. I want to pause before I tell you what happened in that diner. Because this is the part of the story where I have the most, and where I am the most afraid of getting it wrong. My father has told me about that diner conversation maybe 6 times over the course of my life. The first time I was about 15. The last time was 4 years ago, on a porch in October, and he was in a bad mood and he told it short. The versions are not identical. Small things move around. The waitress is sometimes there, sometimes not. The rain is sometimes heavy. Sometimes just a drizzle. The tea in Sato's cup is sometimes green, sometimes black. In one version my father orders a Coke, in another he orders nothing. What stays the same across all 6 tellings is this. The cup. The right hand. 3 sentences Sato said. And the feeling, my father's phrase, the feeling of sitting across from a man who was not actually in the room with me. So that's what I'm going to give you. The parts that don't move. The diner was called Manning's, or something like Manning's, my father isn't sure. It was the kind of place that served coffee and grilled cheese and had vinyl booths the color of old mustard. It's gone now. Long gone. The block has been rebuilt twice since 1967. Sato was sitting in a booth by the window, facing the street, which meant he was facing the school across the road. The school was dark. It was a Tuesday. No class. He had no reason to be on the avenue that afternoon. But there he was. My father crossed the street, walked into the diner, walked to the booth, and sat down across from him. He doesn't remember asking permission. He doesn't remember Sato looking surprised. He remembers Sato looking up from the cup, taking him in, and then nodding once, very slightly, like a man acknowledging a scheduled appointment. My father was 13. He was wet. He smelled like wet wool and rain. He put his book bag on the seat next to him. He didn't say anything for maybe 30 seconds. Sato spoke first. He said, in that careful educated English, "You are the boy from the window." My father has told me that he felt something go through him when Sato said that. Not fear. Not exactly surprise. More like recognition in reverse. The man had seen him. Had been seeing him. For a year. Had known he was there every time. And had never turned his head. My father said, "Yes." Sato nodded again. He looked down at his cup. It was a small porcelain cup, white with a blue rim. Not a diner cup. He had brought it with him. The diner had given him a pot of hot water and he was brewing his own tea from a small paper packet. He said, "You are Japanese?" My father said, "Half." My mother. Sato said, "Good." And then he didn't say anything for maybe 2 minutes. My father, telling me this story when I was 15, said, "I didn't feel like I needed to fill the silence. I don't know why. I was 13, I should have been nervous, I should have been babbling. But sitting across from him was like sitting in a room by yourself. You didn't feel watched. You just felt allowed to be there." After the 2 minutes, Sato lifted the cup with his right hand. My father noticed the hand. "I'm going to come back to the hand." He drank. He set the cup down. He looked out the window at the dark school across the street. And he said the 3 sentences my father has never forgotten. He said, "I am not a student. I am not a teacher. I am a man who is paying a debt." That's it. That's the whole thing Sato ever said about why he was there. 3 sentences. In a diner. To a 13-year-old boy he'd never spoken to before and would never speak to again. My father didn't ask him what the debt was. He said later, he said this to me, "I remember this exactly," he said, "I was 13, but I understood you don't ask a man like that to explain a sentence like that. You just keep it." They sat for another maybe 15 minutes. Sato finished his tea. He asked my father what he was studying at school. My father told him history, English, general science. Sato asked if he liked history. My father said yes. Sato said, "History is useful. It tells you that everything you are feeling right now, someone else has already felt. You are not alone in it. This is a comfort." Then Sato took a dollar bill out of his wallet, put it on the table under the porcelain cup, stood up, nodded once at my father, put on his coat, and left. He took the cup with him. He left the dollar for the water. My father watched him walk out into the rain, cross the street, pause for a moment on the sidewalk in front of the dark school, and then keep walking north on University Way until he was out of sight. My father sat in that booth for another 10 minutes by himself. The waitress came over and asked if he was okay. He said he was fine. He walked home. He never saw Sato again. I need to talk about the hand. Because my father has mentioned the right hand in every telling of the diner story, and it's the detail that, for me, is the closest thing I have to evidence of who Sato might have been. Sato's right hand, resting on the table next to the porcelain cup. My father saw it across maybe 2 feet of space, in the yellow light of the diner, for about 20 minutes. The hand was missing the last 2 joints of the ring finger. Clean old amputation. Not fresh. Old enough that the skin had closed over the stump smoothly, the way old amputations do when they've had decades to settle. The rest of the hand was normal. Broad palm, short fingers, the kind of hand a man who had worked outdoors in his 20s and 30s might have. My father didn't ask about the finger. He wouldn't have. He was 13. But he told my grandfather about it that night. My grandfather was a quiet man, not especially wise, not especially kind, but he knew some things about the world. My grandfather listened to the story my father told him about the diner, about Sato, about the cup, about the 3 sentences, about the finger, and my grandfather said one thing. He said, "Yubatsume." My father didn't know the word. My grandfather explained. It's a Japanese ritual. You cut off the top joint of your own finger, usually the left little finger, sometimes the ring finger, to atone for a serious failure. It's historically associated with the Yakuza. With organized crime. You did it to apologize to your boss for a mistake that would otherwise cost you your life. The first joint for the first mistake. The second joint for the second. You kept the severed joint wrapped in silk and you presented it to the man you had wronged. My grandfather told my father this in a very even voice, and then he said, "Don't go back to that diner. Don't talk to that man again. Don't tell your mother." My father didn't go back to the diner. He didn't talk to Sato again. He didn't tell his mother. But he kept walking past the window of the school. And Sato kept sitting on the bench. And neither of them ever acknowledged, through the glass, that the diner had happened. Here's what I have to say about this. I don't know if my grandfather was right. The ring finger isn't the classic Yubatsume finger, the classic one is the little finger. It's possible Sato lost that finger in a factory accident, in the war, in any of 100 other ways a Japanese man born around 1910 could have lost 2 joints of a finger by 1967. My grandfather made an inference. He was a man of his generation, he'd grown up partly in Japan, he knew the signs he thought he saw. But an inference isn't evidence. What I have is this. A man who paid $22 a month to sit on a bench and watch teaching. Who never watched failure? Who said he was paying a debt? Who had a finger missing 2 joints? Who a Japanese-born grandfather, hearing the story secondhand, told his son to stay away from? You're allowed to draw a line through those dots. I'm not going to draw it for you. My father wouldn't, and I won't either. But I will say, and this is me, not my father, this is my reading, I will say that a man who is trying to atone for something he did to other people by watching a young teacher teach other people, and who looks away every time one of those other people fails, is a man doing something I understand. I don't have a word for it. I don't know if Japanese has a word for it. But I recognize it. That's chapter 5. The porcelain cup. The right hand. The 3 sentences. The word my grandfather said. I'll give you the rest. In the spring of 1968, Sato stopped coming. Taky told my father about this later, in the mid-70s. The stopping wasn't dramatic. There was no final night. No farewell. Sato came on a Friday in April of '68. Taky didn't remember the exact date, sat through the class, stood up at 8:30, bowed, put on his coat, picked up his newspaper, put on his shoes, and left. And didn't come back on Monday. Or Wednesday. Or the Monday after that. Taky said he waited about 3 weeks before he accepted that Sato was done. There had been small absences before, a flu, probably, once for maybe 2 weeks in the winter of '66, once for about 10 days in '67, but never 3 weeks. By the middle of May, Sato's spot on the bench was just empty. Other students started sitting there between rounds. Within a couple of months, nobody in the school was thinking about him anymore. Taky said he thought about writing to the address Sato had given when he first paid tuition. Sato had paid by check the whole time. Taky had his address on file. But Taky didn't write. He said later, to my father, if a man stops coming, that's the man's business. I'm not going to chase him to make him explain. That was very Taky. That was also, I think, very Bruce. Bruce, by 1968, was in Los Angeles full-time. The Green Hornet had been cancelled in '67. He was doing private lessons for movie stars Steve McQueen, James Coburn, Roman Polanski, at $75 an hour, which was serious money at the time. He had mostly stopped coming up to Seattle. When Taky told him, on a phone call sometime in the summer of '68, that Sato had stopped coming, Bruce apparently said, he finished what he came for, then. Taky asked him how he could know that. Bruce said, because if he wasn't finished, he'd still be there. That's the second thing my father told me, Bruce said about Sato. Over 4 years of Sato sitting on that bench. 2 sentences from Bruce, both of them reported third-hand through Taky. He came here for a reason. It's not my reason. But it's a real one. And he finished what he came for. Bruce closed the University Way School later that same year. 1968, he and Taky decided together that Taky would stop teaching formal classes and instead take on a small number of private students. The Junfan Gung Fu Institute, as a publicly operating school, ended. Taky kept teaching a handful of students in his garage and at private spaces for the rest of his life, but the room on University Way with the bench against the back wall, that was done. The building was rented to something else. A bookstore, I think, first. Then a copy shop. Then a travel agency. Then vacant for a while. Then the tattoo parlor, which is still there. I don't know what happened to Sato. My father doesn't know either. We have tried, he and I, at different points, to find out. My father tried in the late 80s when he was going through a phase of wanting to track down people from his childhood. He had the real name. He had the address Taky had passed along. Both leads went cold. The address in 1988 was a parking lot. The real name, my father ran it through some people he knew, came back with nothing useful. A man with that name had lived at that address until sometime in the late 60s, and then disappeared from records. No death certificate in Washington state. No forwarding. Nothing. I tried once, in 2011, after my father gave me the name a second time. I did an internet search. I found one thing. A man with that name had, in 1952, been arrested in Los Angeles County for a crime that I am not going to describe in this video. He had served prison time. He had been released in 1961. After that, nothing. I don't know if it was the same man. The name isn't that uncommon. The timing works. A man released in 1961 could plausibly have shown up in Seattle in 1964, trying to do something with the rest of his life. But I don't know. I can't prove it. I'm not going to tell you what the crime was because if I'm wrong, I'm slandering a man who never did me any harm, and if I'm right, I'm telling you something my father made me promise not to put in a video. That's why the name isn't in this video. That's why I'm telling you Sato. I want to tell you about the last thing. When I was at my father's apartment this morning, before I drove down here, before any of this, I sat across from him at the kitchen table and I asked him the real question. Not why did Bruce let him stay? Not who do you think he was? The question underneath. I said, Dad. Do you think Bruce knew? About the debt? About whatever Sato had done? My father was quiet for a long time. Longer than he had been about anything else that morning. He had his coffee in both hands, the way he does when he's thinking. The window behind him was gray with November light. I could hear his refrigerator running. I could hear a garbage truck outside, a few blocks away. I waited. Eventually he said, I don't think Bruce knew. I don't think he wanted to know. I said, why not? My father said, and this is the sentence I'm going to close this video with, so I want you to hold on to it. My father said. Because Bruce was 23 years old when that man walked in. He hadn't done anything yet. He hadn't been famous. He hadn't made a movie. He hadn't written the book he wanted to write. He was a kid with a school and a pregnant wife and a dream. And a man twice his age walked in and offered him money to sit on a bench and watch him teach. And Bruce said yes. And for 4 years that man sat there. And Bruce never asked him why. You know why Bruce never asked him why? I said, why? My father said, because Bruce understood, without having the words for it, without even being old enough to have earned the understanding, Bruce understood that some people are trying to become somebody different, and the only way they can do it is to sit in a room with a young man who still believes everything is possible, and watch him believe it. That's all. That was the debt. That's what Sato was paying for. Not atonement. Permission. Permission to believe that a man can change. And Bruce, at 23, with nothing yet, with everything still ahead, Bruce was the only person in Seattle who could give it to him. Because Bruce hadn't been disappointed yet. He hadn't failed at anything big. He still believed. And Sato needed to be in a room with somebody who still believed. That was the whole thing. My father put his coffee down after he said that. I didn't say anything for maybe a full minute. Then I said, "That's a lot for you to have figured out." He said, "I didn't figure it out. Taky told me. In 1979. I just didn't tell you until now because I wasn't sure you were old enough to hear it yet. I'm sitting in the rental car on University Way. It's still raining. The tattoo parlor is still there across the street. Through the window, I can see the bench. The dark worn spot in the middle of the pine seat. I don't know if it's the same bench. I want it to be. I've been sitting here for about 40 minutes. I haven't gone inside. I'm not going to go inside. There's nothing inside for me. Whatever was in that room in 1964, in 1965, in 1966, in 1967, in the spring of 1968 when a man in a gray coat stood up at 8:30 on a Friday and walked out of it forever, whatever was in there is gone. It went out the door with him. It went out the door with Bruce when Bruce closed the school. It went with Taky when Taky hung up the keys. What's left is the bench. And my father, 40 miles north of here, sitting at a kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee, watching the same rain come down on his side of the window. And me, in a rental car, 30 years after I first heard this story, still not able to tell it without getting something wrong. Some people come to watch. That's enough for them. That's what my father said. That's what Bruce understood. That's what I'm still, 58 years after Sato first walked through that door, trying to understand myself. Thank you for sitting on the bench with me. I'll see you next video.